Well, good morning, Steeple Church, good morning, Meeting Ground, and good morning, Hinterland Chapel. It's exciting to be collaborating on this series together with Jared and Mel and Will. My name is Dean. You probably won't know me from anything. I live up here on the north coast of New South Wales, part of the team at Hinterland Chapel, and very happy to be with you here this morning as we collaborate and conspire together in kingdom things. We're talking about Sabbath, right, in this series. Sabbath as a form of resistance, Sabbath as a form of gift and renewal. So I'm going to split this session up broadly into two halves. The first half, with the few minutes that I have with you, I want to talk to you about how this idea of rest really is baked into creation. It's part of what it means to be alive. And then the second half, I want to reframe maybe some of the ways that are more helpful to think about rest. And then I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions to discuss amongst yourselves. So, what does it mean to say that rest is baked into creation? Well, there's a verse in the Gospel of Thomas. Now, Thomas is not part of the canon of Scripture. It's not considered part of our library of holy text. But there are a couple of crossovers where you can maybe get hints of things that Jesus may have said. There's one verse that I particularly am interested in as we talk about rest, and that's this. Jesus says to his disciples, "Should people ask you, or what is the sign that the Father is in you, tell them movement and repose." Movement and repose. Repose is just another word for rest. So Jesus is saying, what's a sign that the Father is in you? Now, don't get that confused with a more evangelical idea of Jesus being in you. To say what the Father is in you, well, the Father is the one who hovers over the deep, who brings forth all creation, who in a sense gives us his divine breath. Now, that's really a Trinitarian action. But I think to say that the Father is in you is to say that you are part of creation. Basically, that you are alive. To have the Father in you is to be alive. And Jesus' prayer that we would be in him as he is in the Father, and the Father would be in us. So a sign that the Father is in us is movement and repose, engagement and withdrawal, activity and rest. I like this because we see this modeled in Jesus' life and his ministry. As he goes around Galilee and around Judea, he's engaging with the crowds. He's engaging in a ministry of healing and teaching and deliverance. And then he withdraws, perhaps up into the mountains or into a forest or on a boat by the lake. Somewhere private and quiet, he rests. He disengages from his work and he rests. And it's in that time that we see him restored, energized, reconnected. Now, this is Jesus who does this. How much more so do we need to do this, to be connected to the vine, to be restored and built up so that we can then engage in our work? So we see this movement and repose, action and rest. And the reality is, this is how life is set up. We all have to go and have a job and earn money to make an income, to put food on the table. So we have to engage, we have to work. But we also, it's so important that we rest. Now we see this. Well, I just almost lost the camera there. The rain's about to come in. We are open to the elements here. We see this happen, right, where all through creation, it's about to start raining now, when we'll have times of rain and times of drought. We'll have times of daylight and times of night. We'll have seasons that ebb and flow. We see it in the tides as they rise and fall. We see it in the cycles of birth and death, of death and resurrection. all throughout creation, baked into this thing that the triune God has created out of itself, is this idea of movement and repose, work and rest. Now, both of these things are important, right? Your work is holy. You don't have to be in paid ministry for your work to be holy. If you're a teacher, if you are a draftsman, if you're an engineer, if you're a nurse, maybe you're a baker, whatever it is you do, your work is holy. And so is your rest. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So both of these cycles are important. I went on a drive with my daughter the other day. I have two daughters who are building up their hours towards their Ps. Anyone out there who's gone through the learner driving process, you know what that's like. And here's a movie of us driving through the roads near our house. Now, what I'm trying to teach my daughter here is in this process of engagement of driving the vehicle, we have to be thinking ahead of time. It's no good thinking about exactly where we are. We always need to be looking ahead, round the corner. Where is the traffic going? Where is the road going? There's a saying, right, that you should never let a vehicle go somewhere your brain hasn't already been 10 seconds before. So I'm trying to teach this idea that we need to be thinking ahead. But then there's also times where we stop. Sometimes we come to rest. And when we do that, we actually need to start to engage a different type of consciousness. It's no point looking down the road, wondering what's coming around the corner. Now we're at rest. Now we need to start paying attention to what's around us. You see, because if we don't start to pay attention to exactly where we are, we're going to miss the beauty of the present moment. Now this is hard, right? Because so much of our week is like driving the car. So much of our week is about planning ahead, organizing, task sharing, threat and error management. That's part of what we have to do for our work. But if we keep doing that all the time, we burn out. So when we come to rest, we actually need to change that way of thinking. Sabbath consciousness is different from work consciousness. There's a book written by a man called Dr. Robert Sapolsky. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Here's the premise, right? You're a zebra. Imagine you're a zebra. And you're walking through the savannah in Africa, just living your best zebra life, chewing on the grass, enjoying the sunshine, all right? You're having a great time. Now, there is a lion out there who wants to come and eat you. This is the beauty of zebras, though. A zebra is not concerned about the lion until it gets a direct perception of threat of that lion. So until the zebra sees the lion, or smells the lion, or hears the lion, the zebra is not worried about the lion, right? The zebra is just having a great time. But as soon as the zebra sees it, or smells it, or hears it, it gets a direct sensory input that the lion is there. Straight away, something within the zebra switches. It switches from this mode of rest into an alert mode of survival. And what actually is happening here is its sympathetic nervous system is coming online. So when that happens, it's got a surge of adrenaline, heart starts beating a little bit faster, all the blood around the digestive organs that will help digesting all of that grass, it all gets redirected out to the limbs of the zebra so the zebra can run faster. The blood even develops like clotting agents, just in case the lion comes and takes a big bite out of its rump. It's got more chance of clotting and healing and not bleeding out. So all of these things happen in a beautiful way, in a beautifully designed way to help the zebra survive, right? But it's all short-term survival. There's no point thinking long-term when a lion's chasing you. But here's the thing, as soon as the sensory perception of the lion goes, as soon as the zebra no longer sees the lion or hears the lion or smells the lion, the sympathetic nervous system switches off and the parasympathetic nervous system switches back on, which is more about rest. And all of a sudden, all of that blood flow in the limbs that were making it go faster starts to go back into the core of the zebra and helps it digest its food properly. All of the processes of healing and restoration, which were paused while the zebra was in survival mode, now start to come back online, right? And so the zebra calms down again and starts to digest its food and heal its body. It's great. And it goes on and enjoys the day. Now, we have these systems inside us, but we also have something else, friends, because we are made in the image and likeness of God. And that means that we have imagination. God has given us an imagination to be able to imagine a better world and to create music and art, to see things that aren't there yet so that we can bring them into creation, right? So that we can be co-creators with God. Problem is though, so for the zebra, as soon as that direct sensory perception of threat has disappeared, it returns to a state of rest. However, this is the problem. For human beings who created in the image and likeness of God, who have imagination, we can still imagine the threat even when it's not present. We still imagine the lion even when the lion's gone. Our imagination sort of talks to our nervous system, and our nervous system doesn't know the difference between the existential threat of a lion about to eat us and a 30-year mortgage. So as far as our body is concerned, a lion and a mortgage, pretty much the same thing. So if we were being chased by a lion, same thing would happen to us as the zebra, right? Survival instincts kick in, sympathetic nervous system kicks in. But we need to then, once we're past that immediate threat, rest. The problem with the world that we live in is that we are constantly bombarded with stresses like mortgages, like KPIs, production cycles. Brueggemann calls them the brick quota. Constantly needing to produce, constantly feeling under threat, constantly feeling like we're not enough. And so our bodies are in this state of survival, which they're not supposed to be. We're not engaging in this rhythm of rest and work. We're just pushed up against one side. So Sabbath is really important, because Sabbath comes along as a break in this cycle and says, no longer are you to think constantly about threats and mortgages and markets. At times you have to withdraw. And it's going to be difficult because you have an imagination. And so your Sabbath imagination has to be a different type of consciousness, where you can engage with the natural world, where you can be contemplative and mindful. Even in things that we need to, as stewards of the earth, we need to think about. We're in the midst of an ecological crisis. And as stewards, gardeners of Eden, we need to be working towards that. But if you stay in a point of continual, if your nervous system knows nothing else but the worry of the world, it's going to break down. The God of creation says to you, disengage from your work, disengage from your worries, and rest. And you might say, oh, how can we disengage from our worries when we see what's happening in the world? And I think of the Psalm, how can we sing songs of Zion in a foreign land? Yet God still calls us to do this. It's going to be an act of resistance to disengage and to rest. So, how should we reframe Sabbath? Well, I think one of the major ways we need to reframe Sabbath is simply where we put it on the calendar. So, it's the seventh day that God rests. The traditional Hebrew calendar would have the last day of the week to rest. In Christianity, that was changed to Sunday to mirror the idea of new life and the resurrection. Sunday is supposed to be the first day of the week. I think, and I propose to you, one of the major ways we need to reframe this idea of rest is to not put it at the end of the week, but to put it at the start of the week. Sabbath should not be considered a reward for fatigue. Rest should not be considered the thing we deserve when we've burnt ourselves out. Rather, we need to have a paradigm shift and think rest is actually the place of creativity from which we should work out of. Resurrection rest, coming out of the tomb, is about new life and new birth. So rest is not a reward. Rest is not where we go when we're fatigued. Rest is our origin. Rest is the place from which everything springs forth. So the way we rest is important then. Rest is not flopping on the bed at the end of the day, exhausted, mindlessly scrolling social media, numbing our brains because we can't take it anymore, we're burnt out. That's how society thinks of rest, right? It's just disengaging my brain. And so we use substances, drugs, alcohol, we use social media, anything to just numb my brain from the incessant racing around, this restless anxiety that won't let go. Rather, rest needs to be intentional. Rest is planned. Rest is organized. You prepare to take rest, and when you do, you're cutting yourself off from these stimuli that never really give you a break. So rest involves solitude, involves nature, involves community. That's a different way of thinking about rest. The second way we need to reframe rest that I propose to you is not thinking of rest as something that we do when we're weary. Genesis 2:1-3 says that after God has made the good creation that works well and is perfect, God rests. But the Bible also said that God does not rest because he is weary. God is never weary. So what kind of rest is this that God does when he's not weary? Well, the temple and the tabernacle in Hebraic imagination were seen as microcosms of the entire universe. When you go into the temple, there's portraits and relief murals on the wall symbolizing the Garden of Eden. And so inside the temple, it's like this version of being inside all of creation. And whenever a temple is dedicated in the ancient world, once it's all built and comes together, you would have this thing called a spiration ceremony, where the priests would make sacrifices and there would be prayers. And at the end of that, the deity that was being worshipped was invoked to come and reside within the temple. The Genesis creation account is actually a little bit like that. God creates this temple, palace, garden, this creation. And then on the seventh day, when God rests, God's not like going off into space to take 5, right? I've made the little world, I've molded it, now I'm going to go have a sleep. No. What happens is God creates this creation, and then God rests by inhabiting his creation. God dwells in the creation. John 1 says this. John 1, the word becomes flesh and dwells amongst us. This word is tabernacled. God rests by inhabiting. And this, friends, is what I think we need to reframe rest. Rest is not numbing our minds. Rest is disengaging from work, but primarily rest is about inhabitation. To rest means to fully be present and to inhabit your being, your life, and the creation. That's how God rests. God is with us. He doesn't take a break like a tired parent who puts you in front of a screen while he goes off to the pub. No. the way God rests, the way our Heavenly Father rests, is to dwell with us in creation. So in that way, rest is about inhabitation. Rest is about the place that creativity springs forth from, rather than the reward for fatigue and exhaustion. That's the way I think we need to reframe rest. So friends, I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions now. What are some of the ways that you have found in your life that you detect and you know when you're getting exhausted? What are some of the ways that you've started to learn, oh, when that happens, when I start speaking like that, when I start forgetting things, or when I start getting irritable, that's when I know I've gone too far? And see, here's the thing, the symptoms of fatigue are notoriously insidious and hard to self-diagnose. So by the time we get to the point where we know we need to take a break, we're well past the time where we actually needed to take a break. To be sustainable, we need to rest before we burn out. So what are maybe some of the ways that you can understand within yourself? Some of the biological mechanisms, some of the emotions, some of the early warning signs that say, I'm going to need to take a break from here. I need to take some rest. I think that's why God invokes this idea of a weekly Sabbath, to, at the very least, take one day off each week to rest and to disengage from the work, because we're not that good at self-diagnosing. So maybe what are some of the patterns we can put in place? What are some of the rhythms and movements, habits that we can start to work on in our life to help us not burn out? Secondly, how would it be helpful for you to reframe rest? In your own mind, how would it be helpful to reframe rest? I've given you two ways to not think of rest as a reward for exhaustion, but as the origin of creativity. And also to not think of rest as something that we do to disengage and numb ourselves, but instead it's about inhabiting creation. What are some other ways that you might reframe this idea of what rest is? And finally, in a world that's shot through with productivity cycles, KPIs, this restless anxiety that Brueggemann talks about, is Sabbath something that we can really do as a solo project? Or is the pressure, the pervasiveness of the market, of Pharaoh's empire, is it so pushed up against us that it's almost impossible to Sabbath well as a solo project? Do we need a community to Sabbath with? Do we need our brothers and sisters here today to help us to disengage from the market, to disengage from the productivity cycle, to disengage from all of those ideas of more and excess and growth that continually want to find their way into the church? There's some questions that I'm going to leave with you. Been fantastic hanging out with you for a few minutes this morning. Blessings on the year ahead and your families and your communities. Rest well.